A deadly virus on the loose, a badass crew of operators out to stop it, and the world's fate hanging in the balance. We're not talking about Mission Impossible 2. This is Fast and the Furious presents Hobbs and Shaw. Hobbs and Shaw is a 2019 action-adventure film directed by David Leitch. This is the same guy who brought us Deadpool 2 and Atomic Blonde. The screenplay was written by Chris Morgan and Drew Pearce. The film stars Vanessa Kirby, Idris Elba, Jason Statham, and The Rock. So a virus is on the loose and only Hobbs and Shaw can save the world from it. But to do so, they'll have to take down the Black Superman Brixton and his genetically enhanced crew of baddies. So as you guys know, when I talk about movies, I talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. This time I'll be talking about all three. That being said, let's get to the good. Let's be honest here, the reason people are going to see this movie is because they want to see The Rock face off against Jason Statham once again. And there is no denying that these guys have amazing chemistry. They're really good together, they're really funny, they're both really strong, they're really charismatic, so they really do play off one another brilliantly. But this time there are a few special ingredients added. You have Idris Elba as the big bad Brixton. Idris Elba is awesome in this film. He's physically imposing, he's tough, and you feel like he is a great match for these two big strongmen that he's going against. Vanessa Kirby, whom you guys will recognize from The Crown, is also really great in this. I could see her going on to be a pretty badass female action star because she definitely handles her own. And you can tell she did a bunch of the stunts and the fight choreography herself, which is great. And that's one of the first things you're gonna notice about most of this movie is the fight choreography is rock solid. There aren't tons and tons of cuts that really chop it up because they didn't know their choreography well. There's some pretty long takes in here, and even the ones that aren't match up really nicely in the edit. And speaking of transitions, there are a lot of great split screen transitions in this movie, and they utilize split screen brilliantly early on when they show how The Rock and Jason Statham's characters exist and what they do during their day, how they're different, and once they come together, obviously that split screen disappears. It's probably one of the better uses of split screen since maybe Scott Pilgrim or 127 Hours. Ultimately, people are gonna go to this movie because they wanna have fun, and this movie is pretty fun. There's a lot of stuff that goes on in the intro alone that really gets you hooked, and it makes it seem like this is gonna be pretty interesting, it's gonna be a pretty enjoyable ride, and that's what an intro should do, and that's what it accomplishes. Whether it be the use of split screens or certain shots or the way that it's edited together, it's very stylish, it's very flashy, and again, it's fun. There's two pretty fun cameos in the movie. I really liked one of them and one of the other not so much. Don't worry, I'm not going to spoil who they are because that would be pretty crappy. Hopefully, if you watch other reviews, they're not doing the same, but I definitely won't tell you guys who it is because it's just so much fun when it happens you don't expect it. No matter what characters there are interacting on screen, there's always this really fun cadence and snappy dialogue, and there's good comedic timing. So the dialogue in the film, it's not the smartest, but it works on a comedic level and it does keep you interested in watching. Especially the dialogue between the three core characters. And you could tell that, the director and the writers did care about the dialogue to a point as far as the rhythm and how it works, on an entertainment level. There's a bunch of practical effects in the film, but you have a metric shit ton of CGI in here as well. And most of the time, they blend them together pretty nicely. There's not super obvious wonky movements or anything like you get in a lot of other films that do match that CGI. So for the most part, it's not actually as bad as I thought it would be. While I did love Idris Elba's bad guy, I like the fact that there's this bigger organization, there's something else at play here, and they kind of have to deal with both of those elements. And I think it's neat that might end up being something that can tie into like a potential sequel. The practical stunt work in this movie, like all the Fast and the Furious movies, is awesome. There are so many beautifully executable stunts, whether they be, during fights or falls or the driving. There's just great stunt work here, and you can tell they prepped for a long time and they executed it flawlessly. So kudos to the stunt team for this film. Stunt performers don't get enough attention, they don't get enough gratitude, they don't even get awards in the big shows, which is a travesty. Something else that's brilliantly done in this movie is the sound design. There is so much going on during all these big action scenes, and during some of the more quiet stuff, there's these little layers that you notice if you're paying attention. Like, in the the beginning, when Idris Elba is riding his motorcycle, you know, you hear this like slight robotic electronic sound. It sounds like it's part of the bike. It doesn't just sound like something that they plastered over it. There are a bunch of side characters in this movie that you meet throughout the film, and they are all really interesting. They're all really fun. They all match the vibe of the film. And a lot of them are part of these people's families. Even the people who aren't families, they're trying to do that whole theme like they did with Fast and the Furious of this crew becomes a family. Now, I went to see this movie with a fellow filmmaker here in Qatar and 2 followers from my social media who won a giveaway that I did for 2 tickets. And pretty much everybody agreed that these characters are what ties this movie together. They're what gives it a little something special. It kind of elevates it to more than what it would be. Cinematography, for the most part, was done really well. There's some pretty great shots. There's some interesting stuff that happens, like some long tracking shots. We're not talking about like Inarritu tracking shots and things, but it's pretty up there. And like most summer action movies these days, there's a bunch of locations that they went to all over the world, and I think it adds to the flavor of the film. Now, I grew up watching movies in the 80s all the way up until now. Now, the 80s were really in love with montages, and you don't see a lot of movies these days that have them. This movie has quite a few. They're pretty effective. They show the transition of time and the things that people are trying to accomplish. So, you know, not bad. There are some pretty cool action sequences in this movie. Maybe the whole sequence might not be the best, but there are some key shots in those sequences that are pretty cool. But the one that I enjoyed the most is actually the fist fight at the end between the 3 major characters. And that was because it was the most realistic and grounded action scene of the film, and it also took into account the characters and their chemistry with one another, and that all tied together in this final fist fight. Pretty nice. But that's pretty much all I have to say good about this film. Now, let's get to the bad. So obviously the movie is PG-13 because studios want to get as many butts into seats as possible, and because of that, even though there are so many action sequences with gunfire and melee weapons and people falling off of buildings, there's absolutely no blood in this movie. The entire film, there's not one drop of blood, and because of that, it gives everything an artificial feel, like a video game. If I shoot somebody in the face, if I take an axe to somebody's face, not only is their head going to be devastated, there is going to be blood. And I want to see that, not because I'm some barbarian who just needs blood and craves it, but because it adds a sense of realism to the film. If you haven't seen the previous installment of The Fast and the Furious, where Hobbs and Shaw had to kind of team up for the first time, I definitely recommend that you watch that first. I saw about half of it before I went to see this, and there were some things that were said that kind of tied into before, and I had no idea what they were talking about. You can definitely watch this movie on its own, but make sure you check out that other one first. If you're a fan of films hand-holding you and telling you everything that's happening or has happened or is going to happen through exposition, this is the movie for you because it is massive exposition up after exposition dump. Now, they do try to work them into conversations, and they use them as kind of glue to join one action scene to another, but it's really just exposition. And speaking of those conversations, while a lot of them are fun and interesting, and you do love that chemistry and you like to see how these characters interact, the humor can fall pretty flat during a lot of these conversations. It can get kind of old. Now, you guys know me. You know I love longer films because I get to see more things. There's more character development. That's not the case with this movie. It's 2 hours and 15 minutes and it feels bloated. By the end of the second act, I felt like the movie was finished, and you would think because you have a 2 hour and 15 minute runtime that you can go further into these characters' past and you can get more involved with them, you can like them more, you can be more interested in them. But other than a few sentences here and there that kind of infer to something that happened, it's not there. There isn't any character growth. It basically comes down to, I don't like you. Well, I don't like you. We have to work together, so let's get over it. But I still don't like you. In other words, it is predictable. It is very predictable. You can tell almost everything that's going to happen. And the stuff that you can't predict is because it's so outside of left field and so weird and off the wall and just bizarre. There's no way anybody could have predicted some of the stuff that happens in this film, especially in the third act. The final confrontation between all of these different people, not the final fist fight, that's a whole nother thing. This other thing that happens, there's so many things going on, and it just feels like manufactured and convoluted and disjointed. And that shows because all of the action scenes before that, the fight choreography, the choreography of the vehicles and what they're doing was on point. It was really sharp. It was cut nicely. But when this big confrontation happens in the third act, it's really choppy. You can tell they just shot a bunch of coverage. They came up with the ideas on the day and they just executed them. When you watch an action film, especially where they have fights, You can tell if the choreography was on point and if they had the time to go over it and if they learned it or not by how it is cut. Again, if you watch the earlier fights, there are longer sequences and there's no shaky cam. That whole final sequence, it's shaky cam after shaky cam shot. It's random shots, it's convoluted, the geography is all over the place, it's a mess. And that's a shame because it starts out really solid. You've got The Rock and his crew and they perform the haka. You get to see more about that Samoan heritage. You see that on screen, which you don't get enough these days. And then it basically turns into the fence climbing sequence from Taken 2. And there are some things that happen during this confrontation that make no sense whatsoever. They were only done to progress the plot forward and go to the next action scene. Why is this happening? That doesn't make any sense. Oh, that's right. If they don't go there or do this, then this other person can't see them or snatch them or fight them or whatever. And again, that's a shame because they didn't do that for a lot of the movie earlier on. There is no sense of dread. There is no sense of menace. Yes, Idris Elba holds his own. He's big, he's strong. You feel like he's a tough guy, but you know nothing is going to happen to Hobbs and Shaw or their crew. Especially earlier on when they're in a gunfight and these people shoot at them almost point blank with 3 automatic weapons and they miss everything. So you're telling me these 3 special operators with automatic weapons who are about 10 feet away from these guys couldn't shoot them before they jumped into cover, especially when almost everybody else around them gets shot. It's basically that Game of Thrones plot armor where you know nothing is going to happen to the main characters no matter what. And that takes away any type of consequences or your investment into the characters and your worry for them. Like none of that exists. It's like Star Wars Stormtrooper aim. Nobody hits anything except for the periphery, the other characters that don't really matter. While a lot of the CGI did look pretty good, a lot of it does not. A lot of it is really bad, especially the action sequences. Yes, they blended the CGI and the real people together nicely. That doesn't mean that the CGI looked good. A lot of the CGI is really bad, and you can tell it's a fake motorcycle, a fake car, a fake person, a fake helicopter. It's not convincing. And every time that happened, it took me out of the movie, took me out of the movie, took me out of the movie over and over again. And something else that took me out of the movie is the fact that it's just action sequence after action sequence. And the only thing that ties them together is this banter that happens in between each. And it's basically just so that they can say, hey, we did this, we did that. I don't like you, you don't like me, but we got to go here now and do something else. And that's why I said screenplay. So you have these 2 key elements of the movie that keep it afloat. You have the action sequences and you have all this chemistry and humor between the characters. If they didn't balance one another out, this movie would completely fail. If you tried to make it a character study, there's nothing there. If you talk about the plot, it's been done a million times. It's almost verbatim Mission Impossible 2's plot. It is dumb as Hobbs and Shaw is dumb fun. That's it. You get a good time, but it's stupid. There's just enough there to keep the average film goer, you know, the casual viewer, the normies in the audience happy. And that's it. If you're looking for any kind of depth, if you're looking for anything unique, this is not the movie. It is so average. Yes, you have great stars. Yes, they have good chemistry, but that doesn't make up for all of the stupid stuff that happens in this movie. Physics are completely out the window. The way that things fall, the way that people move, the way that vehicles move. There's a part where they do a halo, and it's not even a halo. Halo means high altitude, low opening. So you jump from high in the air, you fall really fast, and your parachute opens low. They don't even do that. They jump from an F-35 looking aircraft. It's not even a real airframe, and it's very low, and then their chutes open up, and it's actually in this like cavernous area where they would probably hit the wall and die, but whatever. Idris Elba's superpowers and his crew's superpowers, they're not even explained. You see him at one point where like he's getting some surgery done. So is it, you know, hydraulics? Is it nanotechnology? What the hell is it that makes him this super strong man? But all throughout the movie, they try to make it something heavier than it's not over and over, and they really cling to that we're family thing that Fast and the Furious has. But it doesn't work because throughout the film, they don't even really build it up too well, and then when they try to do it in the 3rd act, it feels forced. So now that the Fast and Furious is officially an extended universe because you have the, you know, the other 8 Fast and the Furious films, and now you have the Hobbs and Shaw offshoot. So we've got ourselves another cinematic universe. And that means you need a mid and end credit scene, and you get those in this movie. So make sure you wait till the end because you'll just love that end and mid-credit scene. Sure, they're funny, and they lead to nothing in the next film because you know they're planning a sequel by the way that they built up these characters and brought them together. Another thing that tells me it's for kids was the music used in the film. It's really bad. It doesn't match with anything on the screen almost at all. and it never stops. From start to finish in this movie, there's music, music, music. You never get any time to breathe. You never get any like quiet moments. Even the moments that you get that are quiet, they have this really melodramatic orchestral score, and it's not memorable classical music or anything. It's just there, you know, it's filler. And there's one final point that really tells me that this movie is being aimed at kids. It's for kids, teenagers, you know, people who like Fortnite and all that kind of stuff. That's the crew that they want in this movie. And I'm not talking about just the studio and the filmmaker and the writers and everything else. I'm talking about here in the GCC. And the thing that they're doing to market that movie towards the kids here in the GCC is what I want to talk about in The Ugly. Once again, this movie was censored so bad. I stopped counting at 12 cuts. Some of them were extremely obvious, some of them not so much. But every time there was a cut, myself and the other filmmaker looked at each other like, you saw that? Yeah, I saw that. And there are so many times that these cuts didn't make sense. They're during conversations. There's no one kissing. They're not showing any boobies. There's no sexual stuff. So it shouldn't be being cut. They're not talking about religion or anything that could possibly offend somebody. Basically, all they're doing is cutting out any type of adult situations or innuendos or anything that could be taken as a dirty joke. The movie's already PG-13. Right here, I put 3 cuts in the first 5 minutes, and then I kept having to change the number. You could see all these scribbles. And I got to 12, and I was like, F this. Why should I keep count? But the problem here isn't just the censorship. Let me moderate myself. If I want to see a rated R movie, I'm gonna march my ass up to the theater, pay that money, go in and see that rated R movie because I want to see a rated R movie. It's PG-13. You shouldn't have to censor it at all. If you don't want kids seeing the movie, don't let the kids in. Make them have their parents bring them in with them. That's how it's supposed to be anyway, and that's why everywhere else but the GCC, you do not get this. But that's enough about the massive amount of cuts that were made in this PG-13 movie. So people love it. They think it's funny, they think it's fun, they think it's worth their time. And I'm sure if you are the average film goer, you're gonna love it too. So all that being said, what is my score? Drum roll, please. 5 out of 10.